You walk into a brightly lit pharmacy in Ohio. You hand a piece of paper across a counter. The pharmacist types on a keyboard. A price flashes on a screen. You swipe a card. To you, this is a transaction between two parties, a buyer and a seller, a patient and a pharmacy. But the screen is lying. You are not buying a drug from a pharmacy. You are participating in a blind auction conducted at the speed of light, inside an invisible toll booth that sits squarely across the American healthcare system. The toll booth operators are called pharmacy benefit managers, or PBMs. Their original mandate was simple, rational, and desperately needed. Group millions of patients together to negotiate bulk discounts from pharmaceutical giants. They were hired to be the ultimate cost controllers, an economic shield defending employers, unions, and health plans from skyrocketing drug prices. And according to government audits, they often do exactly that. They secure rebates, they push patients toward cheaper generics, they enforce discipline on a chaotic market. But an economic contradiction sits at the absolute center of their business model.
The entities hired to shrink the bill have found ways to profit from the sheer opacity of the transaction. Through complex rebate negotiations, opaque formulary controls, and a mechanism known as spread pricing, these intermediaries have built an empire in the shadows of the supply chain. They sit between the drug maker who synthesizes the chemical, the insurance company that funds the care, the pharmacy that dispenses the pill, and the patient who swallows it. They do not manufacture medicines. They do not diagnose diseases. Yet they possess the power to dictate which medicines millions of Americans receive, which pharmacies are allowed to fill them, and exactly how the cost is distributed across the economy. A small group of middlemen has quietly engineered a system where the incentives to control costs routinely collide with the incentives to capture the margins. The mechanism is brilliant, the execution is flawless, and it reveals a fundamental truth about modern markets. Whenever you hire a mercenary to guard the vault, you must eventually ask, who is guarding the mercenary?
To understand how a cost control mechanism mutates into a profit center, you must first look at the architecture of a prescription drug transaction. Decades ago, processing a pharmacy claim was a purely administrative nightmare. Paper receipts, manual checks, endless phone calls between pharmacists and insurance clerks. In the late 1960s and 1970s, the first pharmacy benefit managers emerged as a logistical solution. They digitized the process. They issued plastic cards. They built electronic networks to verify coverage in real time. They were the plumbers of the healthcare system, charging a small, predictable administrative fee for every claim they routed. But infrastructure eventually yields leverage. By aggregating millions of patient lives into a single electronic network, PBMs realized they controlled something far more valuable than the routing of data. They controlled access to the patient. If a PBM represented 50 million covered lives, pharmaceutical companies could not afford to be excluded from their network. This leverage birthed the central weapon of the modern PBM, the formulary. A formulary is simply a tiered list of approved drugs. Consider how a tiered formulary actually functions in practice. Tier 1 might be low-cost generics with a $5 copay. Tier 2 could be preferred brand name drugs with a $30 copay. Tier 3 comprises non-preferred brands, hitting the patient with a $100 penalty or excluding coverage entirely. This structure is not merely a medical guideline, it is a financial weapon. The PBM approaches a drug manufacturer with a simple proposition: pay us a massive rebate or your flagship medication drops to Tier 3. The manufacturer complies, funneling millions in retroactive payments to the PBM. The Government Accountability Office, the GAO, has documented this cost control function extensively. PBMs administer prescription drug benefits for health plans, negotiate aggressively for these rebates, and demonstrably affect both drug pricing and pharmacy reimbursement. For large employers and government health plans, PBMs are essential allies. They use the threat of formulary exclusion to force competing drug makers into a bidding war.
The PBM collects the rebate and passes a significant portion of it back to the health plan, lowering premiums and saving the system money.
It is a highly effective mechanism for countering the monopoly power of patented pharmaceuticals. But the rebate system introduces a profound economic distortion. Because the rebate is calculated as a percentage of the drug's list price, the PBM's revenue is mathematically tethered to high prices. If a drug costs $10, a 20% rebate yields $2. If the drug maker raises the list price to $100, the same 20% rebate yields $20. The health plan might receive 18 of those dollars, but the PBM keeps a cut. The structural incentive is invisible but immense. PBMs often favor drugs with high list prices and large rebates over drugs with lower list prices and smaller rebates. The net cost to the health plan might be the same, but the patient walking into the Ohio pharmacy absorbs the shock, paying a deductible or coinsurance based on the inflated list price. The intermediary, hired to lower costs, thrives in a high-cost environment.
The Formulary, originally designed to steer patients toward the most cost-effective clinical option, transforms into a financial instrument optimized for rebate capture. The plumbing has become the casino, and the PBM is no longer just processing the transaction, it is designing the rules of the game.
The rebate engine is only one half of the PBM machine. To truly capture the margin, the intermediary must also control the point of sale. This requires a different mechanism, one deployed not against multinational pharmaceutical giants, but against local businesses, the pharmacy network. When a PBM signs a contract with a health plan to manage its drug benefits, it must guarantee that patients have a place to pick up their prescriptions. The PBM builds a network of participating pharmacies. If a pharmacy wants to serve patients insured by that health plan, it must sign a contract with the PBM. The PBM dictates the reimbursement rate, the exact amount the pharmacy will be paid for dispensing a specific drug. The pharmacy has virtually no negotiating power. It is a take-it-or-leave-it proposition. Here, the economic contradiction deepens through a practice known as spread pricing. To execute spread pricing, PBMs maintain proprietary, highly secretive, maximum allowable cost lists. These lists dictate the absolute ceiling of what a pharmacy can be paid for a generic drug. But crucially, the PBM maintains multiple different lists.
One list is used to pay the pharmacy a rock-bottom rate. A completely different, much higher list is used to bill the health plan. The PBM exploits the gap between the two. Imagine a patient needs a generic blood pressure medication. The pharmacy buys the pills from a wholesaler for $10. The patient hands over their insurance card, and the PBM processes the claim. The PBM tells the pharmacy it will be reimbursed $12, leaving a razor-thin $2 margin to cover overhead, labor, and vials. But simultaneously, the PBM sends a bill to the health plan. The PBM charges the health plan $50 for the exact same transaction. The PBM pays the pharmacy $12, collects $50 from the plan, and quietly pockets the $38 difference. This is the spread. The health plan, lacking granular access to pharmacy-level acquisition costs, sees only the aggregate bill. The pharmacy, desperate for foot traffic, accepts the low reimbursement to avoid losing its customer base. The PBM, assuming zero clinical risk and manufacturing nothing, extracts a margin larger than both the creator of the drug and the dispenser of the drug combined.
The GAO has explicitly documented that PBMs use these pharmacy reimbursement arrangements, including spread pricing, to generate revenue. It is a brilliant arbitrage of information asymmetry. The PBM sits between two blind parties. The buyer does not know what the seller is paid. The seller does not know what the buyer is charged. Only the intermediary sees the whole board. This architecture demands absolute scale. To dictate terms to drug makers, a PBM needs millions of lives. To dictate terms to pharmacies, a PBM needs millions of lives. The incentive to consolidate is overwhelming. Over 2 decades, a wave of relentless mergers and acquisitions swept through the sector. Regional players were devoured. Independent PBMs were absorbed. The market hardened into an oligopoly. The cost control mercenaries became institutions, wielding balance sheets larger than the gross domestic product of small nations. They had become the market itself.
By 2023, the architecture of American drug pricing had reached a state of extreme concentration.
The Federal Trade Commission released an interim staff report on prescription drug middlemen, documenting a staggering reality. The 6 largest U.S. pharmacy benefit managers now handled more than 90% of all prescriptions. Over 9 in 10 transactions passing through a pharmacy counter are routed through one of 6 corporate entities. But concentration alone does not trigger structural collapse. The true climax of this economic evolution is vertical integration. The PBMs did not just consolidate horizontally, they integrated vertically, merging with the very entities they were supposed to negotiate against. Today, the largest PBMs are not standalone companies. They are wholly owned subsidiaries of massive health insurance conglomerates. And crucially, they have purchased or built their own mail order and specialty pharmacies. The referee now owns the stadium, the teams, and the scoreboard. Between 2018 and 2023, the boundaries between health insurance, pharmacy benefit management, and retail pharmacy dissolved completely.
A single corporate umbrella now houses the insurer that collects the premium, the PBM that designs the formulary, the mail order facility that ships the pills, and the specialty pharmacy that dispenses the complex biologics. When a vertically integrated PBM designs a formulary, it is not merely acting as a neutral broker for a health plan. It is steering volume toward its own affiliated pharmacies. The FTC staff report explicitly details how this vertical integration allows PBMs to influence which medicines Americans receive and which pharmacies fill them. Independent pharmacies face a brutal squeeze. The PBM sets the reimbursement rate for the independent pharmacy across the street while simultaneously operating a mail-order pharmacy that competes directly for the same patient. Predictably, independent pharmacists report that PBMs frequently reimburse them below their actual cost to acquire the drug. A local pharmacy might buy a specialized cancer drug for $1,000, only to be reimbursed $900 by the PBM. The pharmacy loses $100 on the transaction.
Meanwhile, the PBM mandates or heavily incentivizes the patient to use the PBM-owned specialty pharmacy for chronic, high-margin medications. The independent pharmacy is starved of profitable prescriptions and choked on loss-making ones. It is a slow, methodical starvation by spreadsheet. Hundreds of independent pharmacies close, leaving rural and underserved urban communities in pharmacy deserts. But the truth of this mechanism requires a strict qualification. The FTC findings include staff analysis and rely on qualified language about incentives and potential effects. This does not mean every PBM contract raises every patient's price. It does not mean every spread pricing arrangement is a scam. Many large employers and sophisticated health plans negotiate transparent pass-through contracts, where the PBM receives a flat administrative fee and returns 100% of the rebates and spreads. The GAO confirms that PBMs do indeed administer benefits effectively and lower net costs for many sponsors. The danger lies in the structural capacity for conflict.
When an intermediary is vertically integrated, its fiduciary duty to lower costs for the health plan directly conflicts with its corporate mandate to maximize profits for its shareholders. If a PBM steers a patient to a higher-priced drug because that drug carries a larger rebate, and that rebate flows into the PBM corporate parent, the cost control function has failed. If a PBM crushes a rival independent pharmacy through below-cost reimbursement to capture market share for its own mail-order business, the market has failed. The tension reaches its breaking point in the specialty drug market. Specialty drugs, biologics, complex therapies for rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis, and cancer represent a fraction of total prescriptions, but a massive, rapidly growing share of total drug spending. Here, the PBMs deploy their ultimate leverage. They classify these life-saving medications as specialty tiers, requiring patients to use the PBM-owned specialty pharmacies. The margins on these drugs are astronomical. The rebates are closely guarded corporate secrets.
The patient, diagnosed with a terrifying illness, is trapped in a maze of prior authorizations, step therapy protocols, and mandatory mail order requirements. They are not consumers making choices in a free market. They are captive participants in an optimized revenue cycle. The PBM dictates the chemical they ingest, the speed at which they receive it, and the exact corporate entity that dispenses it.
The conflict between the GAO documentation of cost control and the FTC documentation of concentration is not a contradiction. It is the exact same mechanism viewed from two different angles. The power to force a pharmaceutical giant to lower its net price is indistinguishable from the power to extract a massive economic rent. The hammer that drives down the nail also crushes the wood. Employers and unions, desperate to contain double-digit annual increases in drug spending, handed their proxy to the PBMs. They asked for a ruthless negotiator, and the market provided one. But as the PBMs grew, they realized that the true profit did not lie in merely reducing the health plan costs. The true profit lay in controlling the flow of money itself.
By obscuring the true price of the drug from the patient, the health plan, and the pharmacy, the PBMs constructed a black box. Money flows in, pills flow out, and billions of dollars in spread, rebates, and pharmacy margins are trapped inside the event horizon. Lawsuits from independent pharmacies allege anti-competitive behavior. State regulators attempt to ban spread pricing in Medicaid contracts. The FTC launches investigations into the opaque contracting practices of the top 6 firms. Yet, the machine continues to operate with ruthless efficiency. The contracts are signed, the formularies are published, the stock prices of the vertically integrated healthcare conglomerates rise. The system is not broken. It is functioning exactly as its incentives dictate. Every market requires a mechanism for discovering price. In a transparent system, buyers and sellers interact, information flows freely, and a clearing price emerges. But when an entire industry delegates the act of pricing to a concentrated layer of intermediaries, the concept of a true market price evaporates. The U.S. prescription drug market no longer has prices. It has list prices, wholesale acquisition costs, maximum allowable costs, direct and indirect remuneration fees, and post-sale rebates. It is a labyrinth of fictitious numbers designed entirely to facilitate the extraction of margin by the entities holding the map. This is the ultimate economic contradiction of the pharmacy benefit manager. The PBM was invented to solve a coordination problem. It was supposed to be a tool, a simple software program designed to aggregate demand and process claims. But in economics, whoever controls the choke point eventually controls the industry. By owning the data, owning the network, and eventually owning the pharmacies themselves, the PBMs transformed from servants of the market into its undisputed masters.
They proved that in a sufficiently complex system, opacity is a highly monetizable asset. The less the buyer and seller understand about the transaction, the more the middleman can keep. We see this dynamic in digital advertising, in high-frequency trading, and in global supply chains. But here, the commodity is not a banner ad or a barrel of crude oil. The commodity is insulin. The commodity is chemotherapy. The stakes are measured in human lives and household bankruptcies. The system functions. Prescriptions are filled. The GAO rightly observes that without PBMs, employers would face an unmitigated onslaught of pharmaceutical pricing power. The intermediaries do provide a shield, but a shield that demands 20% of the kingdom treasury is difficult to distinguish from a tax. The FTC documentation of a 90% market concentration among 6 firms reveals a fragile architecture. When a handful of corporate committees determine the financial viability of local pharmacies and the market access of global drug pipelines, capitalism gives way to something resembling central planning.
The illusion of choice at the pharmacy counter masks the reality of a rigidly managed system. You swipe your card, and the invisible machine calculates the spread, allocates the rebate, and dictates the margin in milliseconds. The pills slide across the counter, perfectly physical, but the economy that delivered them is a ghost. The tension remains unresolved. Employers still need cost control. Pharmacies still need fair reimbursement. Patients still need affordable medicine. And the massive, vertically integrated conglomerates still need to report quarterly earnings growth to Wall Street. These incentives cannot all be satisfied simultaneously. Something must yield. As state legislatures and federal regulators circle the black box, attempting to pry open the contracts and illuminate the cash flows, the Tollbooth operators are already adapting, designing new fee structures and vertical arrangements to preserve their margins.
the market will always find a way to price in the cost of its own complexity.
When the entities built to negotiate the price become the primary beneficiaries of its inflation, you are left with a system that is perfectly rational, mathematically sound, and entirely unmoored from its original purpose. If a market cannot function without an intermediary that eventually consumes it, who exactly is the market serving?